Speaker of the National Assembly, Ms. Thoko Didiza, has confirmed Parliament will be convening the tabling of that revised budget and fiscal framework on the 21st of May in a physical setting. We all know now it's a third attempt to have this budget adopted after the Democratic Alliance and the Economic Freedom Fighters challenged in court the adoption of the 2025 budget with a value-added tax hike. The Speaker has also emphasised every effort will be made to ensure that the revision will be adopted within the legally prescribed time frame. And the Speaker joins us now. Good morning to you and welcome to the programme. It's Workers' Day and we're both working, so I guess that's a good thing or a bad thing depending on how you look at it. But you've given the green light now for May 21st and the tabling of South Africa's Budget 3.0. What exactly does your readiness look like in practice?
Well, thank you very much, Iman. And as you say, happy Workers' Day to you, to your colleagues, but also to all the workers in the country and globally. It is an important day that we need to celebrate and continuously remember the struggles of workers. You indicated already that the minister has outlined in his statement that he has written to the Speaker and the chairperson of the National Council of Provinces that on the 21st of May, he will be able to table his budget to the National Assembly. So as a programming committee, we have met yesterday and agreed with what the minister has said, because it is important that the national budget is passed. So from our side, we are ready as the National Assembly. As you know, when the minister tables the budget, there are three elements that he tables. One is the fiscal framework, which actually outlines what is the revenue envelope, where will that revenue be sourced from? It also indicates how the expenditure will happen in terms of that revenue. It also gives a macroeconomic outlook as to how it is in the country. And it is this that must first be passed, because it informs the second element, which is the division of revenue, that allocates resources to provinces, allocate the resources to municipalities and national government. And the last becomes the appropriation bill. So from our side, in terms of our committee, we stand ready for that tabling of the budget, because what then happens after the minister tables these budget instruments, we refer it to the Joint Standing Committee of Finance and the Committee on Appropriation, which must then deal with these issues in front of them.
All right, I'm glad you reiterated that, because I think it's always good to share an education of how the process works with the public so that they understand what they're seeing on television. But we know that the budget itself signifies a long journey to the point when the minister presented in Parliament, and it's strictly governed by the Public Finance Management Act and the Money Bills Amendment Procedure and Related Matters Act. Departments submit their medium-term budget proposals over 3 years. And so given that there's a lot of work that ostensibly should go into the budget, Speaker, we should not have been in this 3.0 phase if that preparatory work was done properly. Do you believe as Parliament that you're holding the executive accountable for earlier missteps on the reversal of that and the retabling of this budget? From the President all the way down to, DGs and senior civil servants.
We do, but it is important for all of us to appreciate that since the last elections, we have actually entered a terrain that is new to all of us. Yes, people may say, but in 1994, you had a government of national unity. That was a transition. It was actually regulated. It was not a function of the election, because if it was the function of the elections, the party that won the 1994 election fair and square would have governed alone. But it took into consideration the reality of where we were as a country. And that's why you had that government of national unity, which went until the passing of the Constitution. But this time around, the elections outcome necessitated that there must be an arrangement that takes into consideration what the expression of the electorate was, and then we have a government of national unity. So you can imagine that even within cabinet, there were tussles and issues, which is why the first budget could not even be tabled because the executive, which is cabinet, was not agreed. Then came the tabling of the 12th of March of the budget, and the other two parties actually felt that they still don't agree. We went to the committee process. There was a whole undertaking in terms of looking at the fiscal framework, looking at the revenue and the expenditure. And it is important for us to appreciate that when the committee concluded its report, they accepted broadly the framework, but they then made a recommendation because they all felt that this VAT, given where our country is, may not be the best way to go. However, the minister within 30 days must actually look at other alternatives which will avoid us increasing the VAT. And this is why we are now, because then the minister has looked at the presentations that parties has made after the adoption of the fiscal framework. Simultaneously, you had a court case that was lodged by other two parties in Parliament. At the end of the day, the minister came to a point that he's withdrawing the VAT, but he did not just withdrawing the increase of the VAT alone, he also withdrew the division of revenue bill and the appropriation bill so that he can re-look at the figures with cabinet and then come back to Parliament. So effectively, it would have meant what was agreed then can no more proceed because there's a total review of the entirety of the budget.
Right. I guess, and I'll come back to this maybe a little bit later about whether there were enough attempts behind the scenes to actually garner enough input from opposition parties and civil society that democratic legitimacy trumped the day and was upheld. But everything that we saw flow, out of that certainly seems to suggest otherwise, Speaker. Are we going to have a budget that's going to get through and sail through this time is, I guess, the simple question for the 21st of May.
Let me say, Iman, the lessons we've all learned, and I think as South Africans, is that maybe for a long time we had not paid much attention to the budget process. And I think this has enabled us to really fix our eyes on how the national budget is actually crafted from the beginning until the end. So we've become wiser as a society, in my view, given the challenging process that we've gone through. I am therefore confident that starting from cabinet, they would really examine the views of the electorate. They have been listening to what communities have been saying, and they will then make sure that that budget that is tabled on the 21st take these views and concerns on. On our side as Parliament, we will be rigorous as we must be, because in our processes, we must also allow an opportunity for public hearings, which allows me and you and many other members of society to actually make their representation on what the minister would have tabled. And the 18 parties in Parliament will have to examine those views of the electorate and then come up with a clear statement when they report to the National Assembly and in the NCOP.
I mean, Speaker, I can appreciate that you say, we didn't pay much attention to the budget process before. There are lessons that we have learned, and given that we are in an extraordinarily new political configuration now, which is, I guess, finding its feet and sort of cutting its teeth in this process. But it feels as if, and it seems as if, not enough work has been done. Not enough credible work had been done before in the previous two attempts, or even in the second attempt. Let's say that the first attempt was that experimental attempt. Don't you, as Parliament, don't you feel irritated that people discharged with executing their duty should have done it, should have done their due diligence and done it properly? I hear you chuckle.
Yeah. Yes, I must say that as Parliament, we really would want our executive in its collective because all of those parties, 10 of them, they make up the national executive of this country. And therefore, they must, in my view, despite their different political persuasion, appreciate that they owe it to all South Africans to do what is right.
Okay, so when you talk about the lessons that have been learned, and you say that we're wiser, we didn't pay too much attention. What are some of those lessons, Speaker?
Well, let me indicate that actually the budget process don't start when the minister tables the budget. It starts much earlier, where departments, the Fiscal Commission, FFC also makes their input on the budget and makes their report public, which we must read. It also comes on the medium budget policy statement, which the minister tables in November, because that November medium budget policy statement gives an outlook of how the budget is going to look like in February when it's usually tabled. And I do think that as communities, as individuals, as various stakeholders, we need to pay attention to that so that we can start giving our input on what must happen, what changes, what inputs ought to be made so that that budget is reflective of what we would like to see tabled in February or whatever date that the minister tables the budget.
So in closing, Speaker Didiza, this budget comes at a tough time for South Africa's economy. How's Parliament helping to strike the balance between cutting debt and protecting public services?
Well, let me say that it is a situation that all of us as members of society, including the public representatives in Parliament, to really reflect how this budget balances, on one hand, economic growth, because we need jobs, we need employment, we need our economy to grow. But on the second hand, we also need to look at how we make sure that we address the issues of our society in terms of your education, in terms of your health, and all other important elements that makes a functional society. Particularly our history, we know what it has been, so we do need to be inclusive and work towards that as a society. That's why the issue of social security still becomes important, because you still have those that are most vulnerable in our society, and we need to pay attention to how we address those issues that we have all agreed our challenges of poverty, of underdevelopment must be addressed.
I know I said in closing, final one, squeezing in. I mean, should we trust them? Should we trust them to get this right this time? I mean, South Africans are looking at this and thinking, oh my goodness, you've got supposedly the best minds in the country. They're all supposed to talk. You know, people communicate. They send their desired budgets. That gets debated and discussed before we end up with what we see on May 21st or in the 2 iterations previously. But should we trust them to get it right this time?
Well, we live in hope, and we hope they will do so. But I do think that Parliament also has to do its part and be very rigorous to make sure that this budget this time around do get to pass.
Speaker of the National Assembly, Thoko Didiza, thanks for your time this morning.